welcome. I'm really excited to talk to you all today. My name is Kelsey Ross. I am a Senior Product Manager 2 at Appian. And today we're going to talk about unifying and preparing your data for analysis in Process HQ. But before we get into all that, I want to talk about the concept that's on all of our minds, the concept that's at the core of these 4 movie posters, and that is AI. You're actually legally required now to talk about AI if you're giving a presentation at a tech conference, so I want to make sure that I get that out of the way early on. But despite the recent frenzy around AI, none of this is new, right? For years, sci-fi has been using AI for the concepts behind all of our books and our movies. Hollywood has spent millions of dollars instilling a belief in us that one day we too are going to fall in love with the disembodied voice of Scarlett Johansson coming from our cell phones. And yet, despite all of their warnings, AI is here and here to stay. So maybe it's all just Hollywood fear-mongering, right? For many of us, particularly if you're a product manager at a tech company, at the process company, the AI evolution looks something like this, right? You have a manual process that involves a lot of your manual resources to go in and input data and push your cases through your business processes. And so what we really want to do is we want to offload some of that onto AI so that it can do what it does best in transmitting that data through your processes and opening up more of your manual resources for things that need more of a conscious touch. But I still think that Hollywood was right to warn us. There's a balance to be struck between automation autonomy and human oversight when it comes to the inevitable AI evolution. What's the difference between Iron Man and Ultron? Tony Stark, right? When you have a human at the helm, it makes a world of difference. So why am I making this incredibly relevant pop culture reference to a 2015 movie, other than to remind you that you can watch this cinematic masterpiece on your flights home? Well, it's actually a pretty apt depiction of the balance that we're trying to strike with AI, right? When AI has unfettered access to your data, and is left to its own devices and biases to make decisions, what do you get? An evil robot bent on destroying the universe. Whereas, if you have a human helping to guide and govern the AI as it makes these decisions and monitors the decisions that it makes along the way, well, you superpower your business, and you actually use it as an accelerant to get more out of your business data. So how do we make sure that we're properly monitoring AI as it executes? That's where Process HQ comes in. As you build, evolve, adapt, and optimize your processes, Process HQ is your Stark Tower, sorry, last one I promise, your mission control for monitoring the success of your business. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, if you're asking yourself one of these questions like, what is Process HQ? Why am I talking to a bunch of developers about an end user reporting capability? What can be analyzed if you finally buy into Process HQ? How do you set up your analysts for success and what you can do next? Well, then this is the presentation for you. All right, so let's start with that first question about why am I talking to a group of developers about using Process HQ? As developers, you have a lot of roles. I know I used to be a developer, and then I still develop on the Appian platform for our own internal business use cases. A lot of times you're asked to look for the requirements, get them from the business, translate those into the actual functional feature requirements that you need to build out your business application. And then on top of that, your business has some key metrics and reports that they would like you to incorporate. So you're trying to balance out building out these reporting capabilities in addition to actually making good on all of those feature functionality promises. Now I'm talking a lot about the business, asking questions, looking for reports and metrics, and then translating that to you so that you can build it into their business application. Wouldn't it be better if the business could just answer those questions themselves? That's where Process HQ comes in. So if you're not familiar with Process HQ has 2 key components to it. There's Data Fabric Insights and Process Insights. Data Fabric Insights provides a self-service reporting capability that allows your business users to build out reports and take action on their data in real time. On the other side, we have Process Insights. Process Insights is a guided tool that enables your business users to explore their processes and uncover insights to reduce bottlenecks and improve process efficiency. Now, I just talked about 2 reporting capabilities. A lot of times the question that we get is, well, when do I use which, right? You see a KPI over here, a KPI over there. When do I know which component of Process HQ is going to best answer the question that my business is asking me? When we're talking about operational monitoring, you want to use Data Fabric Insights. Data Fabric Insights is great for monitoring your day-to-day business operations. It shows your data in real time so that you can address issues as they arise. This means that for any of those questions that your business is asking you from day one as part of the requirements capture for specific metrics or charts that they would like to incorporate into their business application, you can go into Data Fabric Insights as soon as your business application goes live and start answering those questions by building out those reports and charts. Now, on the other side, we have Process Insights. Process Insights is great for historical trend analysis. In order to get the most out of your Process Insights use cases, you need to amass a critical mass of data in order for us to be able to identify systemic issues within your processes and pinpoint the common shared characteristics that are causing these inefficiencies in your process. So, even though we're talking about these as if they're two separate capabilities, they really build off of one another to tell a complete story. Throughout the presentation today, I'm going to be talking about a single use case, which is a financial customer onboarding use case. So, let's say that we've built out a business application for onboarding those customers on our financial customer onboarding use case, and the business has said, hey, we really need to track how long it takes for these applications to go through our process. We have an idea that maybe there are some sticking points, some bottlenecks, and we'd like to address those. So we start off, as soon as the application goes live, we go to Data Fabric Insights, or better yet, we ask our business user to go to Data Fabric Insights, and we build out a chart that reports on case duration. And as we get more data, as we watch the process evolve over time, we start to see that things are starting to take longer. In March, we see a huge spike in average case durations. So this is where we pass things over from our day-to-day operations to actually see if we can pinpoint what is going wrong with this process. So here we're using that same data that was backed in Data Fabric Insights. We move over into Process Insights, and we start trying to identify the common characteristics that are causing that increase in case durations. And we see that Spain has actually added some additional regulations to the application process, which is causing for longer processing times. So as a result, we say, well, what should we do? We should get an AI agent to take care of those additional documents, make sure that they're classifying and extracting the data so that we don't have all that manual oversight, and see if we can bring our average case duration down back to where it was before the additional regulations were added. Now, once you productize that change, the last thing that you want to do is you want to move back over into Data Fabric Insights, and maybe you extend the original report that you created to now hone in specifically on Spain and just make sure that the feature that you productize is having the desired impact on your overall process duration. So that's a lot of getting to know Process HQ, but it really just boils down to this. This is how I like to think about it. Data Fabric Insights is for the questions that your business knows to ask. The things that they're going to come to you and say, I want to know how many customers are in this region. If they know how to phrase the question and you know that it's collected in the data, they can answer it in Data Fabric Insights. Process Insights, on the other side, is your next enhancement request. It's after the process has been running for a while, a business analyst goes in and identifies inefficiencies, and then they're going to come back to you with ways that you can improve and optimize your processes. So that's Process HQ. Now we're going to talk about how you can actually get your data into Process HQ to have the greatest success for optimizing your processes. As I said previously, I know you all have a lot of roles. I've been in your shoes. You're building out the core application flows, you're testing critical pathways, you're creating meaningful visualizations of your data, and you're continually evolving your application to meet the changing business needs. But the real core of your capabilities and what you bring to the table for your analyst is you all own the data model. The data model is essential to the data preparation process. Decisions you make at the time of creating your data model can have long-term impacts for your end user. Traditionally, data prep is seen as a pretty arduous process, right? You kind of take the data out of your system, you have to do transformations in order for it to be prepared for process mining and analysis. And then as soon as you get it into mining and you do any kind of analysis on it, it's already stale and out of date. And it's seen as a big undertaking from the business perspective, right? Not when you use Appian. Appian Data Fabric is an accelerant to value for your analysis process. All you have to do is incorporate some of the end user's mindset in your current development lifecycle in order to improve their experience so that they can get to answers faster. So let's start with what can be analyzed. You've seen this picture a lot throughout the conference already. We love to use this image when we're talking about data fabric. Anything that you can bring into your data fabric can be analyzed. This is why you have to use synced record types in order to get value out of Process HQ. But you really want to be using data fabric in order to get the most out of your data in Process HQ. Your processes boil down to the data that defines them, right? And traditionally, a process, it doesn't exist in a silo, right? You might have an ecosystem of tools that are all contributing to the same process. So you might have, your traditional application flow that's owned by Appian, but you have some additional documents that are filed in SharePoint, and then your customer records are in Salesforce. It's been very difficult to create a holistic image of your data or a singular image that you can point to for your process to identify in analysis flows where the inefficiencies are. But if you leverage data fabric, you're able to then bring in the data from any system within your ecosystem, create a holistic image of your process, and get down to analysis. As we talk about data preparation, we're going to talk about the two houses of Process HQ. So we're going to start with what you can do during your development lifecycle to incorporate the end user for data fabric insights. I want to start by showing you what the experience looks like for your end user. When they get into Process HQ and we talk about, they're getting to see the data model now, what is it that they actually see and what are they able to do? So in this instance, I'm going to be an end user and I want to create some sort of chart to identify customers based on region. So here you'll see the data catalog. This is actually all of the record types in your system that have been made available to the data catalog for your end user to explore and try to create their own charts off of. Here you can see you're actually exploring the different fields and relationships that are available in your data model as an end user. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to find the region and the customer name field, and then I'm going to choose the visualization that I want in order to better analyze this chart. So as you can see, we give a lot of power to the end user for them to be able to answer their own questions, but they're only as good as the information that's provided to them. Previously, whatever you put in your record type designer was your business, right? If another developer could understand it, they were going to be able to get the same value out of it. But now you have to think about an end user who's going to be utilizing that data to inform their own decisions on the business side of house. And so you might want to be providing a little more context to them so that they're not rooting through, UUID names or abbreviations that they're not familiar with, so that they know the value and the intent behind the data that you're collecting. And it's very easy. You can see in the record type designer, you can go into the map record fields. You see a summary of the information about the data here, and you can make certain changes to incorporate the end user. So things like co-locating fields that are related, such as in this instance, we want to make sure that it's clear that the address field is associated with the customer address. And then you can go in and add display names. These display names are only shown in Process HQ. They are meant to give you the intent behind the different fields for an end user. You can also add a description if you think that they need more information. Additionally, you might want to consider renaming some of your relationships just to make them a little bit more verbose so that they have an understanding of what the relationship is pointing to and whether or not it's what they need to answer their questions in Process HQ. And that's it in terms of display names. Now, some of you who are maybe in InfoSec, you've been squirming in your seats because I said, let's just bring the business user into your data model, right? You want to make sure that they're only seeing the information that they should be privy to. You want to make sure that it's still secured enough so that you're not showing data to end users who shouldn't have access to it. There are steps that you can take within the record type designer to further lock down your data to make sure that no end users are getting visibility into information that they shouldn't see. So here you can see we're in Process HQ, and you can see the extent of power that we provide to the end user, right? They get to see revenue trends over time. They get to see onboarding over time. You can see that in the case list, they can actually take action on the data in real time to address any issues that they see. So the first thing that I'm going to recommend is go ahead and go to your actions and make sure that you have the right initiators programmed for your process models to make sure that we're not giving that action to somebody who shouldn't have it. Additionally, you can secure the data within your process. So in this instance, you can create record level security. We're going to say that only our data stewards and our admins should be able to see applications that are still in progress. Anybody can make a report off of things that have actually already closed, but for anything that we're still working on, let's just make sure that only the most privileged users see that. You can set up that rule here, and you can even test out to make sure that the right people have the right security, so that you know that when they're using it in Process HQ, that only the most privileged users see that in progress data. Now, it's not just the rows that you might want to lock down. Sometimes there are sensitive fields that you're collecting that you wouldn't want to give access to just anybody. So here we're collecting net worth. This is something, again, that we would only want privileged users to see. So I'm going to go ahead and say only my admins and my data stewards are going to be able to see that field in Process HQ. So now our data is ready for our end users to use in Data Fabric Insights. Here are my tips and tricks for data analysis. You want to secure your data, as we just talked about, making sure that any rows or fields that are considered sensitive are not being exposed to your end users. Also, eliminate any unnecessary relationships. As I showed you early on, your end users are actually scrolling through the data in your hierarchy, all those different connections that you've made in your record types. So if there's anything that doesn't need to be there, it would really help them out to not have to kind of decode what may or may not be actually used in their business process. Just go ahead and remove those if they're unnecessary. Logically group related fields, so just co-locate fields that are related to one another. That's just because we're all human, and it helps to know that when two things are related, that they're next to each other. And then, of course, adding those display names and descriptions. It does not impact any of your development processes, but it can really help that end user to understand the intent and value of the fields that they're seeing. Okay, so now you're excited. You're like, we can get value out of this right now. How do I get it turned on? You can go into the Workspaces tab of any record type, and you can configure it to be visible in the data catalog. I will call out, you will need to do this for any record type in the relationship tree that you are trying to expose to the data catalog. So it's set on a per record type basis. So all you have to do is go in and configure this field, and then it'll be available for your end user to use. You can also set this up in production for any record types that are already available and ready to be used in Process HQ, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Okay, and that's all you need to do in order to make sure that your end user can be successful in Data Fabric Insights. So now that we've talked about the reporting side of house, let's talk a little bit about ensuring success for continuous analysis. So we're going to move over into Process Insights. A lot of times we get asked, how do I make sure that I can mine my data? Your business user has heard about Process HQ, they know that they can get value out of it, but they just don't know whether or not they have the correct data model in place in order to be successful. I've distilled it down into the 3 things that you need in order to mine a process in Process Insights. You need a case ID, a timestamp, and an activity name. Now, the case ID, you're probably already tracking. This is a unique identifier that you use to define your business object being the thing that's going through the process. So in our financial customer onboarding case, it's that application from the customer going through the workflow to be onboarded. Next, you need the activity name and the timestamp. So the activity name are the different steps that define your process, and then we just need to know when that happened along the way. Obviously, we would then need the relationships between these record types. So we need a case record type, so the record type that defines the business object, and it needs to have a relationship to the event log. I will say one of the other common questions that we get is, well, I have many event logs that define this part of my process. You will have to stitch those together into a singular event log that defines the events for the entire process, but you just point that to your case record type, and you'll be able to mine that process. Now, I said, oh, this is all you need in order to get value out of Process Insights. If I'm being honest, it would be a pretty bland experience if this is all the data that you have. This is just kind of the core structure of your data that you need in order for it to fit the requirements to actually be mined in Process Insights. So if you want to get the most out of your analysis experience, there's a little bit more you can do. This is where your data fabric comes back into play. We call these case attributes. When you are creating your data model, you want to bring in as many attributes as possible because this is the information that we use to slice and dice your data for your business process to provide more clarity in terms of which characteristics are causing the greatest inefficiencies in your processes. So the wider the net that you can cast, the greater analysis you can provide for your end user as they try to dig into their processes. And once again, it's not just limited to the data that you have within Appian. Anything that you can bring into Data Fabric can be used for analysis. So if you have data coming in from external systems, such as Salesforce or DocuSign, you can actually bring that data in to further provide more clarity in terms of your process and the images of your data that you can then use for analysis. And just to really hammer this home, what does this actually look like for your end user? This is the end user's experience of the drill down flow. So this is when you've actually created a process within Process Insights, and your analyst is going in, they're looking at, you can see here this KPI on the left, they're looking at average case duration, and they're seeing a spike. You can see at the end, there's a spike in the average case duration times, and they're trying to get down to the why. Why is this happening? What is causing this most recent spike in average case durations? And Appian actually goes through and using automation, it measures out the difference in attributes that are causing the highest inefficiencies in your processes. And we break it down based on attribute to let you know what the most common characteristics are that are causing that inefficiency. Now, I like to highlight the structure that we need at the beginning, just so that you know for any of your existing processes, if it fits that model, you can already be getting value out of Process HQ. But if you're starting out on a new application and you just want to make sure that you're reinforcing the best data model, we do have ways in the product to speed up your time to value with such capabilities as record events. Now, I do want to hammer home, you do not have to be using record events. We did a lot of great press for record events early on, where we were like, oh, it's a great way to get your data in the right shape for Process HQ, but it's certainly not the only way. We do want to make sure that if there are any processes that are already running in production, that you have the right relationships between your case and events table. You can immediately go into Process Insights and start building out your processes. But if you're starting fresh, you might want to consider using record events, because record events reinforce the correct data model. It can streamline your configurations. It comes with a native audit log for your record list. And then it also makes it easy to configure other ways that you can get benefits out of your analysis experience, like configuring the automation type. What is the automation type? Oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking. You can get the most out of your analysis experience by configuring things like collecting the automation type information as your process executes. So once again, I'm showing you an image from Process HQ. This is the automation type KPI. So this is something that actually comes out of the box with Process Insights that calculates the relative rate of automation in your process. All you have to do is collect the information as you have write events in your process and just tell us whether or not it's occurring by a human or it's being done by automation. This is great for developers because a lot of times you are the ones who are being tasked with the AI evolution of your processes. So it can be a great way to reinforce to the business, hey, you know, we started working on this. We've moved to automation for a lot of our different nodes in this process. Here you can actually see the impact of that on our process over time. So let's take a look at a quick demo on how you can set that up and how you can be streamlined to value using record events. Here you can see I'm in my case record type, and I'm going to go to the Events tab and start configuring record events. Like I said previously, if you already have relationships you can use, you can actually just map them within the Record Events tab. But we're going to go ahead and generate the relationships for the first time here. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of event types that I know that I need for this particular process and go ahead and generate, and it'll create all of the record types and the right relationships for it to be able to streamline the right events later on as we curate our process. So let's then generate the actions that we need. I created the create, update, and delete actions. I'm going to go ahead and start modifying the create flow for this particular process. So in this instance, we have, let's go back to the Spain example where we have these new regulations. We need to extract information from new document types that we're getting. So we're going to use an agent to then extract those forms, classify those documents, and triage them for us. Now, AI is not 100%, right? As I said previously, sometimes you need to have a human in the loop to make sure that it's staying on track. So in the event that the classification fails, we're going to configure this process model to actually triage it to our admin users who are the right people to be able to classify those documents and make sure that we update our process with the right information about the types of events that are happening. So this is where we're getting into the write event for this process, where we actually want to collect the data about the event that just executed. So in this instance, I'm going to go to the setup page, and you can see when I select my record, it already knows the events that I'm trying to configure, and the only thing left for me to do is tell it what event was executed and whether or not it was done by a human or automation. So in this instance, when it's going through the rerouted path because classification failed, I just said that it was done by a human. And in the event that it was auto-classified, I can go in and do the same setup process. And in this instance, for the same event type of the classification of the application, I can say that the user was done by the system and that it was actually triaged by AI. And then this is the same data that's going to back that automation KPI that you saw in Process Insights. Now, that's not all that you can take into account when you're trying to make sure that your analyst is set up for success when they're trying to get to insights in Process Insights. There are a couple of structural factors to consider when setting up your processes, right? Here we have kind of a simple abstraction of a process. You have events, which are the actual steps in your process, and then you have sequences, which is the time between these two events. In order to get the most out of your analysis experience, there are certain decisions that you can make when curating your data model that can have long-term impacts for your analyst. So I said at the beginning, I said the only thing that you need is one timestamp, right? That is technically the only thing you need. But what I would love even more if you brought along with you was if you had two timestamps. And that is that you can tell the difference between when an event starts and when it ends. Here you can see I've shown you what the analysis experience looks like, the difference being whether or not you have a start and end event. So let's look at the first sequence that you see there, and you see that it's taking a week. If you only collect start data, we don't know whether or not the sequence is taking a week. So in that instance, it's actually the time between handoff between events that is taking too long, or whether it's actually the activity that's taking too long and you have people who are spending too long on a particular part of the process. Now, if you collect both timestamps and we know the difference between the sequence starting and the activity ending, well then you can see, okay, application received is actually only taking a day, and then it's just waiting around for somebody to pick up for 6 days. Let's see if we can deal with that lag between the transitions between events, and it helps your analyst better understand where the lag in your processes are. And then I just wanted to highlight once again, when you're looking at this data in Process HQ, this is the experience that your end user gets, right? This is the process diagram. This is where we actually take your data, your cases that have gone through this flow, and we actually map out what it looks like for your analysts. And then they can see the spikes based on like the color and the size of the activity nodes and the sequences to tell you the difference between things that are executing quickly and the things that might take a little bit too long. And then they can actually interact with the process diagram to drill in deeper. Like they can select a particular node in their process, like in this case, that application received node that's taking too long. They can click into it and we'll do a comparison analysis of duration across activities to give them a better analysis experience. And that's all you need in order to be successful for analysis. Let's just review some of the tips and tricks that we talked about along the way. First off, starting with collecting those start and end timestamps that we can provide a better analysis experience. Collecting automation type to reinforce process optimization efforts. Unifying activities and avoiding ad hoc activity names. I'll talk about this a little bit more in just a minute when we get into some of the data prep activities that you can actually do as an end user. But certain events, such as update case, we see this very frequently. This is where, like, if you're going in and you're changing a description of your business object, where it can happen at any point in the process, it's ad hoc, it's not actually moving the state of your object, it's not changing the status of the thing that's going through the process. It's just good to take that out of the event log data so that it declutters your process diagram experience, since it's not something that your analyst really needs to analyze. Another just tip, synchronous activities make the process diagram better. And then the more data that you can bring in, the more that we can analyze. So cast a wide net as you're setting up your data fabric. Make sure you're bringing in any attributes that give us a little bit more color about your data, about the business object going through the process, and that'll improve the analysis experience. So, that's all that we need to talk about in terms of the development experience, what you can do as a developer during your development lifecycle to make sure that you're setting up your end users for success. Let's talk about the data that's already in production, that's ready to be used in Process HQ, and what you can do there to further augment that process. Let's talk a little bit about the personas in Process HQ. So we have 3 personas, right? Your data governors, your data stewards, and your end users. And I put the developer here down at the bottom because you all are really the backbone for success of each of these personas. And in some instances, depending on your business's size, you might actually be playing one of these roles in production. Who are these people? Well, the data governor is a new system group that manages data stewards. So they're the ones who go in and manage who can have access as a data steward. Who is a data steward? They're the people who build a process. So the data steward is really the person who sits between the developer and the end user and ensures that only the right people are getting the right data for process insights. This is why I say that in some instances, this might be you. You might be the right person to be determining who should have access to this data to build processes and process insights. And then finally, obviously, we have the end user or the analyst who's actually going in, they have the business context, they're the ones who are going to be doing the reporting, doing the analysis, and uncovering those bottlenecks in your processes. So, how can you set this up in production so you can get value today? Well, we do have a data governance page that enables you to go in and actually configure access for any of your record types that are ready to be analyzed already in production. So here you can see, I can go in, I can modify this record type to say, or not modify the record type, modify who has access to it in production by configuring the data stewards, which is actually taking the configuration both from the record type security table and any ad hoc access that you want to set up in production to enable data stewards to then use that data to build out processes. And then the other thing that you can do is you can also enable any record types that you can see in the data catalog to be visible, any record types that you can see from the governance page to be visible in the data catalog so that people can start using it for data fabric insights. Additionally, we want to make sure that you always have full control of the data and can see who is using what. So as you can see, this is a whole list of record types that are on the system. As a data governor, you can go in and you can see, oh, this record type is actually being used quite a bit. You get to see some metadata about it, like where the data is coming from, relationships, the data structure, the actual list of your data preview. You can test out security to see whether or not the right data stewards have the right access. And then you can actually see dependencies. So this is great if you want to see who is using this particular record type for processes within Process Insights. Okay, and then lastly, I want to talk about the ways that you can further augment your data as a data steward in production. So a lot of times we hear that you already have your data in production, you're ready to get value out of Process HQ. Maybe there's some minor tweaking that you need to do to the data to make sure that you're setting up your analysts correctly. And for that, we have the role of the data steward and a little bit of data prep that you can do as you're creating processes to being used in Process Insights. So here, let's walk through the data prep flow as a data steward. So here you can see I already have my case record type. And this one happens to be using events, but you can see I can select relationships that are actually not the configured events if my event log already exists, but isn't the record event field. Here I wanted to emphasize once again that you can bring in data from external systems. So things like our customer name and our customer region are kept in Salesforce. You can see that it's actually using the same names, the display names that we configured earlier on in the presentation there. But then I'm seeing that net worth field again that I don't want to be exposed to my downstream analysts. I should have access to it, but they shouldn't be able to see that raw data. So I'm going to obfuscate that so that they can still get the value out of having the information about that field, like what bucket certain net worth falls into, whether it's low, medium, or high, but then I'm not exposing the raw data to my analyst. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm creating a custom attribute, which will then be shown alongside the other data in my data model. And once you can see that it's listed there at the end, the last column there, I can actually go ahead and deselect the raw data to make sure that it's not going to the downstream analysts. Now, in addition to that, you can make some other configurations, once again, display names and descriptions that might be beneficial for the end user as they're exploring your data in Process Insights. You can do that for any of the fields that are related to your case attributes. Now, things are looking pretty good for my case. Let's go ahead and configure my event data. Here's where I would do some curation, like, no one's really going to find an insight based off of an ID, so I'm going to go ahead and deselect those fields. Additionally, I can add custom attributes if I need, and here I'm going to make sure that I have the right mapping set up. You can change any names that you want, and then this is where you do the mapping of like your case ID and your automation type and the activity name. Now, previously I talked about those ad hoc events. You can do some additional filtering here to further configure your event log to make sure that only the right data is being passed in for analysis. So here's an example where I have an activity that can occur at any point in the process, and I want to make sure that it's not adding clutter to the process diagram. So I'm going to go ahead and set a filter on my activity field and say exclude the pre-onboarding compliance check. We don't need that for the type of analysis that we're going to do. And you can see that the activity log updates just in time, and that clutter won't be included for the end user. Finally, the last thing you want to do is make sure that your right analysts have the right access to explore your data in Process Insights. You can go ahead and set that up, and then how frequently you want the data to be updated. So we're getting the data from your data fabric. You can sync on a schedule to make sure that you're getting live data and reacting in real time to changes in your business applications. Now, this is the point where we get to what I like to call the whatabouts in Process HQ. So these are like the gotchas of, you don't know my application and this is why it doesn't fit, right? So let's talk a little bit about the things that are kind of seen as stumbling blocks for Process HQ. First off, legacy applications. Like I said, I'm a developer. None of us wants to do the refactor, right? A lot of times you're using CDT still, and as I've said, you need to be in Data Fabric, you need to be using synced record types in order to use your data in Process HQ. The great news is that you can get value out of Process HQ without having to do any kind of migration or changes to your actual functioning business application. You can do this by creating a synced record type that points to the same data that your business application is using. So you just create a new record type and then point it at the same database table and use that for analysis in Process HQ. It's separate from your business application, and maybe use this as a jumping off point to kind of start those conversations about a greater refactor if you are one of those legacy applications that hasn't made the change over to synced record types yet. Once you start seeing the value that you can get out of Process HQ and the other value that you get with synced record types and using it throughout your development experience, maybe you just use that as a jumping off point for those types of conversations. The other thing that I want to call out here as well is sometimes you have more complex data transformations that you might need to do. So this is where you weren't thinking about a mining use case when you're building out your application. There are many applications that pre-exist record events as part of record types. We do have this ability down at the bottom. You can see what we call record-backed records. This is a way that you can actually query an existing record type and do a data transformation and back a new record type based off of it. And that can be used for some of your more complex transformation stories. Okay, so then next, we've ticked off legacy applications. What about scale? A lot of times you have a lot of data that you need to bring into your processes for analysis. We are up to 20 million rows and counting. More to come on that, but in 25.2, we got 20 million rows. And then also similar to scalability, another question that we get asked a lot, there's a little bit of fear around using Process HQ because people are saying, oh, well, it's pointing to the same database table that my critical business applications are running off of. I really don't want there to be an impact to performance there. The good news is we have separate resources allocated specifically for Process HQ, so you're never going to see an impact to your runtime business applications. They are separately allocated for Process HQ. And then finally, security. Hopefully I don't have to harp on this too much because we talked about all the ways that you can set up security and make sure that you're setting up your end users for success. But the data governor is the person who sits between your data stewards, who are the people who sit between your developers and your end users. We support any kind of federated security model that you might have. You are in complete control of how your data is used and if it is used in Process HQ. And so your data is always locked down and make sure that only the right users are getting the right access. Okay, so hopefully at this point you're like, how do I get my hands on it now? As we've talked about, in the data governance page, if you already have Process HQ and you already have synced record types, you can get value out of Process HQ today. You can go in, you can configure whether or not a record type is available in the data catalog just by clicking a button in the data governance page. You can set up data stewards if you have a case record type with that related event log, and you can actually start building out processes and get into the analysis flow for record types that are already in production without having to go through a deployment lifecycle. So let's recap what we talked about today. Hopefully you're thinking, realizing that data prep in Appian is simple, it's easy to integrate into your existing processes with continuous benefits not only for you as a developer, but for your end users. Adopting synced record types for analysis is an easy way to get process monitoring value and insights without committing to the full refactor of using synced record types yet. Some small adjustments that you can make in your existing development lifecycle can make a major impact and make your analysts more effective and efficient for finding insights, freeing up developers to focus on actual application functionality. And finally, Process HQ is the best way to continuously monitor your processes for improvement, providing a secure and unified platform powered by your real-time business data. If you're wondering what's next for you, if you're excited to get your hands on Process HQ, you can try it out in the Appian Community Edition. Be sure to talk about Process HQ as you're working on new business applications, research different use cases that could benefit from these capabilities, and then just build with continuous monitoring in mind. If you have a minute, if you have any questions, I'll be up here at the end. You can come up and talk to me about Process HQ or your use cases. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.